Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. Today our guest is Parry from Drive to Save Lives. Hi Parry.
Hi, nice to talk with you today.
Great to have you here with us. So tell us a bit about yourself. Introduce yourself. How did you hear first about the D2SL? What got your attention?
So I'm currently living in the United States, in the western part of the United States, and I have been interested in Eastern Europe, and especially Russia and Ukraine. I lived in Russia for a few years, traveled to Ukraine often, and so I've been following the conflict, quite a bit, and is wondering how I can be involved to help, and to support Ukraine. And I listened to a podcast. It's by the Telegraph. It's a British news agency. They
Yeah.
do one, called the Ukraine the Latest, and they did an episode about following British volunteers that drove vehicles from the UK into Ukraine, and donated the vehicles as well as supplies. And so that caught my attention. And I thought, well, I could do that. That's how I can contribute, in supporting Ukraine. So I did research. There's multiple organizations in the UK that were taking vehicles, but I found Drive to Save Lives and contacted them. And after a bit of going back and forth, found an opportunity where I could do my first drive, to drive from the UK to Ukraine with one of their trucks. And so that's how I got involved with Drive to Save Lives.
You're from the US, so what made you decide to travel to Europe and then drive a car all the way from the UK to Ukraine? How many times have you done this in total?
Okay, right now I've just done it once.
Mm-hmm.
Back in September, I drove a vehicle from Southwest UK, Devon, Cornwall,
Mm-hmm.
Into Lviv. It took about 3 days.
Okay.
And I had actually lived in the UK prior, so I wasn't nervous to go to the UK. I have a British driver's license, and
yeah, I'll ask about that in a moment, because it might be a struggle for some people
for some
to
people,
drive. To drive on the other side of the car.
but had no problems. I had lived in Europe for about 10 years, prior to doing this drive. 2 years in the UK, and then about 8 years in different parts of the Europe. So it was, wasn't nervous to go there. Mainly nervous about driving. Have never driven a British car in Europe. Having the steering wheel on the other side, but eventually adjusted to that.
Was that your first humanitarian mission ever, or had you done similar volunteering or aid work before? Anywhere. Like I'm not talking about Ukraine specifically.
Yeah, this is the first time doing aid work. When I was in university, I actually spent 2 years as a missionary for my church, and I was assigned to go to the UK. So that's how I first went to Europe and got and lived in the UK for 2 years as a missionary, doing volunteer work. And after that point, I fell in love with being in Europe, and that that led to spending a lot of time later on. But doing volunteer work, during university, got me interested in that. And now I'm very more interested in doing humanitarian or NGO work wherever I can.
Right. So let's go to the car specifically. So how did you get involved in this vehicle delivery itself? So walk us through how the car was chosen and prepared. What are the key differences between the cars you are used to compared to the European models?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of logistics difficulties driving, with for Drive to Save Lives, and being based in the US. The way the organization usually works is, they have a request for a car or a specific vehicle. They're able to locate that vehicle, and then they try to get that vehicle from the UK to Ukraine very, very quickly. And a lot of times you don't know when the vehicle is available or when it can go. And so, people who live in the UK can, say, I'm flexible, I can go this week. It comes available, and then they take the car. So being from the US takes a lot more logistics. So I had just said I'd be available, for this week. The vehicle came available. I, hadn't even booked a flight, and so I literally within, learning the vehicle is absolutely available, I booked a flight and flew out the next day.
Okay.
And arrived in London, early in the morning. I met a co-driver there at the airport. We then drove to Southwest UK, picked up the truck off of a farm, and then drove the truck from there, straight to Ukraine. So it took more logistics being in the US versus if I was in UK or in Europe, being available, ready at a moment's notice, and logistically getting to where I need to start the drive from.
What kind of repairs or modifications are typically needed before a car is sent to Ukraine? Did you have to do anything?
In this case, we didn't. Typically, though, when they're sourcing a car, they'll look to making sure, that it's at least roadworthy. A lot of the vehicles we take to Ukraine are at least 10 to 15 years old. The car I took was a 2004 Ford Ranger truck. And, it's, 20 years old, but it had been, just, high level check to making sure, had oil, it could drive. There wasn't any obvious deficiencies.
Issues, yeah.
So we actually took the truck straight off the farm. It had what's called a shepherd's gate or shepherd's cage in back, where they had kept animals and stuff like that. We took the vehicle as is, straight from the farm. We knew it could drive fine, and took it over 3 days, 2,000 kilometers into Ukraine. But I think nowadays, they've had a couple of vehicles break down. We try and check in the morning, check the fluid levels and just some basic checks, making sure it's fine to drive that day. So we're, as we get better procedures about, making sure that the car is safe and drivable on a daily basis.
Sure. What kind of insurance do you need, both for the car and yourself coming from the US?
Basically, just needed insurance, driver insurance, for while I was in the UK, and then a different driver's insurance while I was in Europe. And then the insurance would cover, mainly the driver, not the car. The car, we had to make sure we had, a valid registration, and that the sale of the car was complete. In terms of, the ownership had transferred, that we could take the car.
Okay. What paperwork has to be arranged before departure? Especially for someone not based in Europe like yourself.
Well, and this is where, working with an organization like Drives to Save Lives, they have a few people who can do all the administrative, to making sure that the registration is complete. Yes, it's called the V5 document. The purchase is completed and has a current MOT, from a government standpoint. And so they actually handled all that paperwork. I didn't have to do any of that. I just, I had to send pictures of the different documents and stuff like that. But as an American, I wouldn't know what to do with the different paperwork or documentation. But with that organization supporting all that was a big help.
Based on your experience, what should anyone traveling to Ukraine on such a mission absolutely take with them? Whether it's, like some documents, I don't know, tools, whatever comes to your mind.
The main learnings from my first one is you need to travel very, very light. In terms of, just taking, if you can take all of your own stuff in a backpack, you need to, be able to travel light. We fill the vehicle full of supplies, and so there isn't room, to take much luggage or anything like that. And you just need to be very flexible. In driving, let's say, the 2 to 3 days from the UK to Ukraine, you don't know when you're going to stop to eat. So, just always, I brought some energy bars as well as, water bottle and things like that. It's just, food and liquid with you while traveling. Sometimes, you'll stop at a gas station or petrol station to get some things, but you just need to be able to sustain yourself while driving. I also bought and brought a cheap Apple CarPlay display. I could buy one in the US for like 30 euros. And so that was very helpful because there isn't, being an old vehicle doesn't have much of a display, and being American driving in the UK or across Europe, I need good, navigation. And so just a good display that did all the navigation, and especially traffic in Northern Europe, how to avoid, different traffic and stuff like that. And then just having, making sure you have power, for your phone. A lot of times the cigarette lighter, power doesn't work. So I also brought a battery back.
Yeah, power bank. Yeah, something like that.
Making sure, I've heard other drivers, they get in the car and there isn't any, the power doesn't work for keeping your phone charged.
Yeah, very useful.
Had a power bank also, but luckily didn't need it. With the car power working.
Have you used the map, like a physical map, or it wasn't necessary?
It wasn't necessary. That's why I brought the CarPlay display. It's just easy to use that in driving. It'd been too hard to use a paper map. I haven't used a paper map in probably 15 years or so.
You mentioned one thing. So it's not only about the car. So obviously you're driving a car to like hand it over to the Ukrainian military, but you also bring other supplies. So talk about that. What kind of stuff is usually being transported?
And it really depends. Within there's a network of NGOs that Drive Saves Lives is part of, and so there's organizations throughout the UK, throughout Europe, or even Ukrainian organizations who stage supplies for things that are needed within Ukraine. For my specific trip, we had arranged to pick up humanitarian supplies from an organization in Germany, and so we drove into northern Germany, and we picked up supplies and we filled the truck, and we filled the bed of the truck. We filled as well as any space in the cab of the truck with humanitarian supplies that were being taken to Ukraine, for people who are in refugee status that are leaving the front and needed, some basic supplies. And so our truck that we took was filled with that.
Okay. Yeah. So it's we have to mention that it's like a kind of cooperation between the D2SL and other organizations that like bring important supplies for the civilians.
Yep.
Going back to the drive, so which part of the route do you think was the most challenging for you, and why?
Actually, the hardest part was getting from Calais in France and through Belgium and the Netherlands. Was just the traffic was very, very heavy. We probably picked the wrong time of day to be driving, but just being stuck in long traffic queues. Once getting to Germany and then just staying on either the Autobahn or the main motorways in Poland, you have traffic and you can make lots of progress. But unfortunately, the first day, spent a lot of time in traffic queues, across Northern Europe.
So you don't recommend Belgium? I was actually going to ask you about the route you've taken. So it was Belgium. So France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and then Poland, right?
And then Poland, and then into Ukraine. Yeah. And it pretty much just followed the navigation, whatever roads or routes, depending on traffic and stuff that it recommended. So, but I probably next time, driving through Northern Europe where it's very congested, try and do that at the nighttime or something like that, just so it can make faster progress.
Yeah, exactly. You already mentioned it, but maybe you have something to add. So how long did the journey take, based on like other experience of other people? How much time do you need to actually get to Ukraine from the UK?
It took us 3 days, but we had a delay in picking up the truck within the UK. So pretty much spent the first day just in the UK, and we were only able to get to Dover, to the ferry port that first day in the night. But we were hoping, to have gotten into Europe. The second day, there's another vehicle going from Drive to Save Lives, and they had difficulties where they had a co-driver that became ill, and they actually had to drop him off at a hospital there in the UK. And so he was by himself. And so I had a co-driver, Tony, who's at Drives to Save Lives. And I'd always recommend you have a co-driver. And so we stopped in Calais and stayed there for about half the day and waiting for this other trucker vehicle that Chris was driving. And he, just making sure Chris was fine, he was driving alone. And then we decided, from Calais, to Ukraine, that we'd just carpool the rest of the way, given that he didn't have a co-driver anymore. And so that delayed us on the second day. And so we only got to, northern Germany on the second day, with both vehicles. And the third day was a very, very long day. We woke up, we left about 5 a.m. And then we didn't get to Lviv until about 3 or 4 in the morning. So it is pretty much a 22-hour drive that day just to get into Ukraine. But it would have been better if we worked logistics better, but you just never know what happens. And so it just meant for that third day was a very, very long drive.
Yeah. I was going to ask about how many hours per day, but I guess you can't, plan that. So it depends very much on different conditions.
Yep.
And definitely with a partner, not solo.
Yeah, I'd recommend it with a partner. Some people do it solo. I wouldn't recommend it. Anything can happen, and you can spell each other out. It's just safer, if you're doing very long drives, to have someone to share the driving with, and the logistics and other things.
Where do you usually sleep and eat along the way?
So the first night we just had to find somewhere, a reasonable place to stay, just in Dover, very early the next morning. The second night we actually stayed at a volunteer's house in Germany, who had put together the humanitarian supplies, and so we stayed at that person's house, and it was great to be able to to stay at a house and not need to pay for lodging and stuff like that. But it was nice to, and there's some volunteers that offer up their house to stay across Europe if the logistics work out. So it just depends, it depends whether you can work such arrangements out, or if you just need to find your own lodging and logistics.
What is the Ukrainian border like? Were there any unexpected issues with the documents, customs, procedures, given that you're from the US?
Nothing particular. The border. You're always worried about the Polish side of the border. Just it really depends on the border officials. What kind of mood they're in. Some, that a lot of times, they'll know you're bringing things into Ukraine. Sometimes they'll give you a hard time. Sometimes they won't. It just really depends. Who's at the border. When we got to the border, the Polish official, at the beginning acted offended that I didn't speak Polish, on that side. And so but we were there at 3 a.m. So they're tired. And so after a minute, a little bit, they just, said, okay, let's just get this over with. The one thing that, being American, I was very glad I had prepared is I did bring an international driver's license. And as I went into Poland, they did require, since I was driving the vehicle across the border.
So one more useful thing to bring with you when you're driving.
Yes, is having an international driver's license if you don't have an EU driver's license. And so the Polish official required that, and luckily I had brought that with me. The paperwork, Drives to Save Lives, had everything with the V5 and other documentation fine. Sometimes, the documentation isn't complete, and then figuring out how you go across. But for us, we were fine, and we went through just fine with the documentation we had. And then when you get to the Ukrainian side, they're much more friendly. They can see you're driving a truck. They see many British vehicles coming across as volunteers, and so it's just a matter on the Ukrainian side. Once you get there, it's just doing all the paperwork on that side for bringing a vehicle into Ukraine.
So how did you feel the first time you crossed into Ukraine?
It was 3 a.m. I was hoping to get a picture at the border with the Ukrainian side there at the border. You see a lot of people who drive vehicles in taking that picture as you cross the border. We were all tired. We forgot to do that. We were just getting to Lviv and getting some sleep in. But it was, you felt, you'd gone from kind of EU into a different environment. As you cross the border, the border officers, they're armed. You feel that you're going into more of a conflict zone. And so, just not knowing what to expect from that point on.
So did you personally experience any air raids or sirens, or were there any moments that were genuinely dangerous when you were in Ukraine?
Not that I felt that danger to myself. When we were in Ukraine for the first part of September, and it was at that point that the drones and the missile bombardments within Ukraine had started increasing quite a bit. So when I was in Lviv, we had a few air raid sirens that you'd hear, for some of the Shaheeds or different missiles that were starting to come, as far as Lviv. I spent 3 days and I traveled to Kyiv. I took a train, to visit some.
So you stayed in Ukraine. You did not go back immediately.
No. So we came to Lviv, and then from Lviv I went to Kyiv, and when I was in Kyiv, there's quite a lot of air raid sirens all the time. First, I had the app on my phone, that alerts you, but it was going off all the time. And the first night I was in Kyiv, I went to a grocery store. The sirens are going off. People just looked around and they kept shopping. I guess they get to a point where they're just used to it all the time. But at nighttime, you'd hear, the sirens. You'd hear explosions, and as well as some of the countermeasures, for the drones going off. But I don't know. I never felt that much of danger, even though that type of environment was going on around you.
So looking back, was there a moment that hit you emotionally hard while in Ukraine, or it was kind of you adjusted to the to the Ukrainians kind of not reacting as emotionally as probably in the first days of the invasion.
Yeah. For me, it was very emotional when going to the military cemeteries. So the military cemetery in Lviv, where they had many of the soldiers buried in a specific part, and you go there, and just seeing how many were buried there, as well as how young, as well as how many females were in the military there. In Lviv, when I was there, I remember looking at the grave of a female soldier, and and then seeing her family come to visit her, and then just kind of watching that as they came, pulled up chairs and were at her grave, and just the loss and sacrifice of the people there. And the same in Kiev, going to Maidan Square, or the Wall of Heroes, and seeing just how many people are impacted, or that everyone has lost someone, and just the suffering that has gone on there in Ukraine for even before the official invasion in 2022, but going back to 2014 in the Maidan revolution, and that point on, they've had conflict and loss throughout the country, and just the length and the amount of suffering that the people have gone through there.
Yeah, because we have to remind our viewers that this war did not start actually in 2022. It's been going on for like many more years since the Crimea was taken by Russia.
Yeah, and for that's 2014. Beginning of 2014 to beginning of 2026. It's now been going on. Actively
12 years.
12 years. Yeah.
Tell us about the moment you handed over the car. What was the reaction of the people? Were there actually soldiers that on the spot, or like how does this look like? Because I don't actually know.
Yeah. For this one, we dropped off the two vehicles. Well, first of all, we went to the post office to send a lot of the humanitarian aid to different places, across Ukraine. And then we actually then dropped off the two vehicles that we brought in, the two trucks, at an NGO. And there wasn't any military there, but we knew that the NGO accepting the trucks was then eventually sending it to the military. But they're very, very grateful to have those vehicles, and then some of the supplies we brought in that they could then pass on to the military organizations. But the people in Ukraine are extremely grateful. I was actually probably most impacted when I stayed in Lviv. People notice that you're coming with a British vehicle, know that you're a volunteer. And so when I stayed in a hotel, a woman came up and insisted on paying for our rooms there, to making sure that we felt welcomed and appreciation for us. But just that kind of appreciation across the people of Ukraine for anyone who supports and actively helps them was probably the most impactful part of the trip.
Yeah, very, very emotional. So do you actually meet the units who you actually like delivered the cars to, or like there's no such occasions?
For this one, we were dropping off the vehicles in Lviv that they would then get sent on. Other drivers who take it further past Lviv, let's say into Kyiv or other places, they're probably more handing to to the actual users of the vehicles. When I did go to Kyiv, I did go to a place that repaired vehicles for the front, ones that we're getting ready, either getting wire cages around them or things like that. So it's interesting to go there and then seeing, those vehicles and how they're prepared, for the front, and kind of, the impact. I did see some vehicles that were struck by drones and trying to get repaired, but seeing how important the vehicles are, for needing mobility on the front, either for first responders or for the military itself. These vehicles, are taken out so fast, with drone warfare, but and just how needed they are.
Yeah, so you kind of answered a bit to my next question. So what happens with the car after it's delivered? Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, and usually they go to different organizations. Some of them we bring in some ambulances, and they'll go to medical organization, medevac, or medics on the front. Trucks that are brought in. Some are used. There's one organization which is a bucha. They'll take the trucks and put on heavy machine guns, and they'll be in front of cities, to try and take out Shahed drones or other drones coming in. Other ones are taken to the front, are used by drone crews, where they take the drone crews to a place where they'll deploy the drones and then quickly, move away, because they have to be moving all the time. And other ones are for supplies or logistics along the front, but these vehicles are needed, all throughout the front of Ukraine, for them to do their asymmetric warfare. Just being able to be very mobile, to get very specific resources to a very specific place at a specific time, and that requires a lot of these smaller vehicles.
So you mentioned about going to Kiev later after the delivery. So did you volunteer in Ukraine? Are there any specific volunteer initiatives that you can recommend? Like anywhere. I'm not talking specifically about Lviv.
Lviv. Next time I go, I'll do some volunteering. There's places you can either go to help, with the camouflage netting, and so they even do that in Lviv and other places. And then in Kyiv, they have organizations Brave to Rebuild, where you can actually volunteer where there's damage, where you help them with basic construction or removal of debris and things like that. I've been in contact with them, and we'll probably try and do that on my next trip to Ukraine. Or there's some of the kitchens out there that is like Hell's Kitchen in Kyiv. I don't have any baking skills, so I don't know there, but I can do light construction and stuff like that. But
Sure.
There's lots of different volunteer opportunities. The key is to be able to spend enough time. You need to probably have a week where you can make a difference, or learn and something meaningful over that amount of time.
How do you usually get back after delivering the car? So for anyone coming from the US, what's the most practical way to get back?
Well, you have to there. As there isn't any planes or air traffic. all ground. So all ground transportation, whether it's buses or trains, vehicles, to get around Ukraine. I took trains. So, once I was, dropped off the vehicle in Lviv, I took a train to Kyiv. But then getting back across the border, the train is hard to do because it's a limited train, limited space. So from Lviv, you have to take a taxi. I ended up taking a bus. I chartered a bus that then goes to the border. You can, the border process can take a while. And so I took a bus to the border, walked across the border, and then took another bus, from the border into Poland,
Mm-hmm.
and then from there made my way to Krakow, and
Mm-hmm.
then Krakow, flew back to the United States.
So usually it's Poland, so you're not going back to the UK, or
Yeah.
could you share like the funniest, the weirdest thing that happened during your trip? Can you think of something like that?
Probably the most interesting, when I was in Kiev, I went to their kind of main cathedral, Sophia,
Mm-hmm.
in the heart of the city. There wasn't much there. I wanted to, go to some of the historical places there.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting in terms of I was there when the air raids are going, sirens are going
Mm-hmm.
off. So
Mm-hmm.
just being there, they shut the doors, and so they don't let anyone else in. And so it's only one in there. And
Mm-hmm.
then I left. I was going out, and there's someone playing musical instrument, and it's just quite the contradictory. You're at a historical site.
Mm-hmm.
You have air raids going off, sirens going off, and then you have a musician there just
Mm-hmm.
ignoring everything and playing the mandolay, you know, um, music during the whole thing. But it was amazing to see kind of all elements at once.
Mm-hmm.
The history, the people, the resiliency of the people.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you have, there's an air raid, going off at the same time. But um, just all the contradictions, of that scene all at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Mm. Has this trip or experience changed you in personally in any way?
Yes, quite a bit. In terms of being more dedicated to the cause of Ukraine,
Mm-hmm.
especially seeing, especially seeing what's going on in the last few weeks, as Russia has bombed the energy, and you know where the people in the larger cities don't have energy, don't have water, don't have utilities,
Mm-hmm.
and just the resiliency of them, but just the harshness and the cruelty that goes on for the mass population, makes me want to do much more to making sure that Ukraine wins this conflict. They have their independence, they have peace, and then they don't have to deal with that type of aggression going forward. Just you've seen that suffering, but that determination, and as the conflict gets, I say, more brutal
Mm-hmm.
for for most people, as well as the threatenings across Europe, just that this type of aggression has to get stopped. This
Mm-hmm.
this kind of national kleptocracy that Putin has has to stop, and we have to make a stand in Ukraine, and to stop that aggression from continuing on.
What do people in the US most misunderstand about delivering the cars to Ukraine, or aid in general?
Most people in Ukraine, well, in the U.S., and unfortunately, don't understand the politics
Mm-hmm.
outside the U.S. And so they, and unfortunately, the politics in the U.S. right now are, not, they don't recognize, the kind of the threat and what's going on within Russia, within Putin, you know, kind of
Mm-hmm.
authoritarian, and so they're more worried about what's happening in the U.S. and all they see is, their belief is that there's just two corrupt countries fighting each other, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone can be involved. They
Mm-hmm.
don't really understand, the true nature of the conflict, between Russia and Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
One trying to take over the other, and the other one wanting to be sovereign and be independent. And and so Americans are just confused, not knowing, and kind of apathetic, not caring, because it doesn't affect them in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very discouraging, and especially within the last year, where U.S. has cut off a lot of its support to Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
not having those resources, and that's what prompted me to get much more involved. Just being discouraged with what was happening in the U.S. and kind of between war fatigue as well as apathy, and not sending resources to Ukraine anymore, just means that I myself and other people need to do that. Because our country's not supporting Ukraine like they should.
Would you encourage other Americans to get involved, and if yes, why?
Yeah, and so everyone I talk to, that's why I started an NGO myself, is to get people to get funds, to get resources, to help people understand what's going on in Ukraine, so that they can become involved and help with the help the Ukrainians with this conflict.
And one last question before I let you go. Is there anything you'd like to say to people watching, donors, future volunteers, Ukrainians that are following our channel?
It's extremely critical to get involved. We have to, we have to do something. Otherwise, it'll continue on across the world to other countries. And so, having Ukraine being the first ones to successfully stop Russia's expansions or Russia's aggressions, and then seeing aggression, as the world, the politics around the world change, and the laws, that the rule of law is diminished. We need to stand up, for the rule of law, for the rights of nations and their sovereignty, and be active, actively do something, or it's going to get worse. And so it's standing up now to get as involved as much as possible to stop this, the current trend that's going on, or that trend is going to, put us back into the dark areas we had, 100 years ago.
So that's it. Thank you so much, Parry. Good luck with your next trip and your NGO. Hope to see you on our channel in the future.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
No problem. Okay. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.